Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China, and I'm Jerry. Recently, I was talking with a friend about how China and the West are different, how we see things differently to each other and respond to different situations because of our different experiences. And she asked me if I meant about things like gunpowder. That's a great analogy, I said, but it's a misunderstanding. Almost everyone I know, especially here in China, thinks the same thing. China invented gunpowder and used it for fireworks, while the West stole the technology and used it for weapons. Well, it's not strictly true, although there is some truth in it. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, there were some weapons using gunpowder technology during the 10th century. Imagine being a soldier in an army during the 5 dynasties and the 10 kingdoms period. This was a period of great instability after the fall of the Tang dynasty. While you're there, you're having exploding projectiles coming into the ranks. It must have been terrifying, and may very well have been what led to the formation of the next dynasty, the Song. Now, my reason for saying this is that I can't find any references about the use of black powder or gunpowder during the Tang dynasty, where we do know that gunpowder was known of, but it appears to have been used mostly for fireworks and perhaps communicating signals over distances. But the Song dynasty, which started only 50 to 60 years later after this period of instability that we talked about, is known to have used something called the fire lance or huoqiang. It's impossible to prove, but it's not a difficult theory to accept that the birth of the Song dynasty around 960 AD could have been accomplished because of the beginning of the age of gunpowder as a weapon of war. Now, that almost certainly happened inside of China and during that period where this emergence occurred. However, what can be proven and is known is that the first ever item that we would recognize as a gun using black powder, as it was known then, could be found in Chinese history, was actually invented by the Portuguese and brought to China in the 13th century, so 300 years later. One other point worthy of note is that despite having the availability of these weapons for several hundred years before the West did, there's absolutely no evidence that China used them outside of their own, as it was, quite fluid borders at the time. So despite the myth, the truth is a little different. Chinese did invent gunpowder, but of course they never used that word. They had a black powder that was and still is named huoyao, which very interestingly means fire medicine. And for several centuries, China used it for peaceful and celebratory purposes until some enterprising military leader developed a different use for it. What's really interesting, though, is that although gunpowder was used inside of China, once the technology had been acquired, or perhaps stolen, by countries outside of China, Western countries, there was only one purpose for its use for several hundred years, and that was to kill people. It was quite a while, perhaps 300 or 400 years later, before some enterprising engineer decided we could use this to help build roads and to help miners to extract resources faster. Somehow, that got me to thinking more about how Chinese and Westerners view different aspects of the development of weapons. About a month ago, I was on a farm in the southern parts of Zhongshan, and I watched a drone flying over some fields, dropping something onto the rice. I commented that it's nice to see drones being used for peaceful purposes. After mentioning this in a previous video, I was accused of parroting CCP talking points by one viewer. So I decided to search a little bit deeper for what the word drone meant in Google. What I saw was a variety of different drones which can be used for peaceful purposes. Then I changed the search criteria and I used the words US drone. The result was a very, very different one. It seems Google also parrots CCP talking points. Everything that I could now see was a military item. And if you look carefully at the captions under the picture, the words tell a very different story to the words in the first photo. Kill, shoots down, war, combat. Every photo is something to do with conflict. I decided I'll take this a little further and see what the search for the word robots would find. Again, harmless stuff. There wasn't anything in these pictures to be afraid of, until I looked for the same thing as I did with drones. I changed the wording to add US to the start of the search. Once again, there's nothing on this page that I'd want to see walking up the pathway towards my front door. It's a terrifying scenario that a search for US drones or US robots fills me with fear, while a search for drones or robots shows me how peacefully they can be utilized. Extrapolating this thought experiment a little further, I looked for the word police. Finding nothing on this page that would cause me very much concern, I went to see what the words US police would do for me. Oh dear, guns, gas masks, a man being murdered, and generally scenes of intimidation, forceful intimidation. Where does this all lead me? It leads me to a conclusion, or perhaps I should say an opinion that I've long held, and that is, where there's a peaceful way of doing things, or where there's a confrontational way of doing things, it will be the West, which nowadays is led by the USA and was previously led by colonial powers, the British, Spanish, French, Dutch, and the Portuguese, which will always take the confrontational route. Think about how everything needs to be settled with firearms, invasions, interdictions, special operations, sanctions, and legislation. These are all written in one country to slow the development in another country. Try to think about how many times China has done any of those things in the last 70 years. And I think most discerning viewers would agree. The opinion is a valid one. Once again, there's an article attached with links and confirmation of all the things I've stated as facts, although there's no doubt that some will disagree with my opinion that the West is more confrontational than China. I would really appreciate it if, before getting into the comment box to tell me how wrong I am, you find some supporting documentation which proves me wrong, rather than just your opinion or that of a journalist who's repeating these worn-out cliches without any real evidence. I'll happily take on evidence based on challenges, and I'll listen to those, I'll read them, and I'll respond to them. And for all the others who watch to share my insights into China, thank you again for watching. I appreciate your time, your comments. Please hit the like button, please share, please subscribe, because that's how this message gets out. And thanks once again for watching. See you next time.